The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of faded asphalt cutting through God's forgotten country, the kind of road that led nowhere particular and everywhere that mattered. Sunday afternoon sun hung low over the Montana horizon, casting long shadows from the pine trees that lined Highway 89 like silent witnesses to 4 decades of tire marks and exhaust. 6 motorcycles rode in tight formation, their engines a synchronized thunder that rolled across the empty fields where wheat used to grow before the economy went to hell and took half the county with it. Frank Brennan rode point, his hands steady on the handlebars, despite the arthritis that turned cold mornings into small battles with his own joints. 62 years sat on his shoulders like old leather, worn but serviceable. The Purple Heart he'd earned in the Mekong Delta stayed in a drawer at home, but the lessons from that jungle never left. Stay alert, trust your instincts, protect your brothers. His bike was a 1974 Harley-Davidson Shovelhead. Same year he'd come home from Vietnam with a limp and nightmares that still woke him some nights. The machine purred beneath him now, a familiar companion that asked nothing and gave everything. Behind him, Ray Wilson rode with the precision of a man who'd spent 20 years in the Marines before opening a hardware store on Main Street. His eyes scanned the tree line constantly, old habits from recon missions that never quite died. Tom Hayes kept the middle position, broad-shouldered and steady. A factory foreman who'd raised 3 kids and helped raise a dozen more through coaching, Little League and teaching Sunday school. Pete Sullivan brought up the left flank, his mechanic's hands black-stained even after scrubbing. His marriage gone, but his loyalty to the Brotherhood absolute. Carlos Rodriguez rode right, a retired teacher whose calm demeanor hid the intensity of a man who'd seen students fail and succeed and learned to celebrate both. Joe McKenna anchored the rear, construction site muscles beginning to soften with age. His son's death 5 years back, a wound that showed in the set of his jaw. The last Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, founded in 1975 by 6 Vietnam veterans who couldn't quite fit back into civilian life, had never been about rebellion or outlawry. They were working men who rode on Sundays because it reminded them they were still alive, still free, still brothers, in ways their families could never quite understand. 40 years of monthly rides, through marriages and divorces, births and funerals, boom times and recessions. The ritual mattered more than the destination. Frank's radio crackled with Ray's voice. Temperature dropping, front moving in from the north. Nothing needed saying beyond that. They'd ridden together long enough that weather reports were just excuses to hear each other's voices. Confirmation they were all still here, still riding. The landscape rolling past held memories in every curve. That bend, where Tom had wiped out in '82, walked away with nothing but bruises and a better story. The overlook where they'd scattered Carlos's wife's ashes 3 years back. Her request to rest somewhere with a view. The straightaway where Pete's daughter had learned to ride before she'd stopped talking to him, before disappointment built walls too high to climb. Every mile marked with the accumulated weight of shared history. Frank felt it before he saw it, that combat sense that had kept him alive when half his platoon hadn't made it home. Something wrong in the air, a wrongness that prickled at the base of his skull. He sat straighter, eyes sharpening on the forest edge where sunlight struggled through dense pine. Movement. His hand came up in the signal they'd used since the beginning. Attention, possible contact. 5 bikes shifted almost imperceptibly, formation tightening without bunching. Every man suddenly more present, more alert. Tom's voice cut through the radio static. Got movement. 2 o'clock. Someone running through the trees. Frank saw her then, a small figure stumbling through underbrush with the desperate, uncoordinated movements of pure terror. His throttle eased back, the Harley's rumble dropping to a growl as he raised his fist. Full stop. The formation responded like a single organism, bikes sliding into defensive positions without discussion, muscle memory from a war most Americans had tried to forget. She burst from the tree line into the gravel shoulder like something pursued by demons, all flailing arms and wild eyes. A girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, dress torn at the shoulder, feet bare and bleeding, hair matted with leaves and small twigs. She ran 3 more steps before her legs gave out, collapsing to her knees on the rough ground with a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Frank was off his bike before the kickstand settled, moving with a speed that belied his age and the protest in his left knee. 6 large men in leather vests, faces weathered and hard, converging on a terrified child. He knew how that looked, knew the fear it could bring. He slowed, hands visible, palms out. His voice came out gentle, the tone he'd used with young soldiers fresh off the transport planes. "Easy there, sweetheart. You're safe now. We're not going to hurt you." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, pupils dilated with adrenaline, chest heaving. Scratches covered her arms, dirt smeared across her face where tears had cut clean trails through the grime. She tried to speak, but only a wheeze emerged. Ray approached from the other side, his white hair and kind eyes somehow making him less threatening despite his size. "It's okay, honey. Just breathe. Nice and slow. You're safe now." Frank knelt slowly, old knees protesting, getting down to her level. Close up, he could see the bruises on her wrists, the way she held her left arm close to her body, protective. Someone had hurt this child, recently and repeatedly. Her voice cracked out, small and desperate. "Please, please don't make me go back. He's coming. He'll find me." Tom had already pulled a water bottle from his saddlebag, offering it with the practiced ease of a grandfather. She grabbed it with shaking hands, drinking so fast she choked, water spilling down her chin. Pete's voice carried that particular edge that came from recognizing evil. "Who's coming, sweetheart? Who are you running from?" She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, eyes darting back toward the forest. "My stepfather, Dale. He was taking me somewhere, to give me to them. The men, they paid him money." The air between the 6 bikers thickened, each man processing those words, understanding flooding in with the cold certainty of men who'd seen humanity's worst. Frank felt his hands curl into fists, forced them to relax. Scaring her more wouldn't help. Joe's voice came out careful, controlled despite the rage Frank could hear underneath. "What's your name, honey?" "Grace. Grace Ann Porter." She looked at each of them in turn, searching for something, safety, belief, help. "My mama died 6 months ago, cancer. Dale, he changed after. Got mean, started drinking more. Then these men started coming to the house. Bad men with cold eyes." Carlos crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. Frank had stopped believing in God somewhere between Saigon and the body bags, but he respected Carlos's faith, envied it sometimes. Grace's words tumbled out faster now, a dam breaking. "This morning he said we were going for a drive. Didn't look at me. Just said get in the truck. We drove out here, way out where nobody goes. He made a phone call, said something about the package and payment on delivery. I knew. I just knew if I stayed, I'd never come home." Tom's jaw worked, that look he got when one of his grandkids was threatened, when the gentle giant underneath the weathered exterior wanted to tear something apart. Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. He went to make another call, and I ran. Didn't stop. Heard him yelling, but I kept running. Then I heard your motorcycles, and I just prayed someone would help me. Frank reached out slowly, let her see his hand coming, touched her shoulder with the lightest pressure. "You did exactly right, Grace. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met." She looked at him like she wanted to believe that, like she needed to believe someone thought she was worth something. Ray had his phone out. "I'm calling County Sheriff. Jim Dockery's on duty today. He's good people." Frank nodded. "Tell him we've got a child in immediate danger, possible human trafficking situation. And Ray, tell him to hurry." Pete scanned the forest with the intensity of a man who'd learned to spot ambush positions. If her stepfather was close enough to yell at her, he might still be tracking. As if summoned by the words, an engine roared to life somewhere in the woods. Not a car engine, but a truck, big and mean, thrashing through underbrush that hadn't seen a vehicle in years. Grace's whole body went rigid, terror transforming her face. Her scream was pure animal fear. "That's him! He's coming!" The 6 bikers moved without discussion, forming a wall of leather and muscle between Grace and the sound. each man calculating angles and options with the cold efficiency of soldiers who'd protected LZs under fire. Frank felt that old familiar feeling settle over him. The clarity that came when violence stopped being theoretical and started being imminent. Pete's hand moved toward the small of his back where Frank knew he kept a .38 snub nose. Legal, registered, rarely mentioned. Frank caught his eye, shook his head slightly. Not yet. Not unless there was no other choice. The truck crashed through the last line of trees like a drunken beast, a Ford F-150 from the late 90s, primer gray and dented, suspension shot to hell from the abuse it was taking. It skidded to a stop 30 yards away, dirt and gravel spraying from locked wheels. The driver's door flew open and a man jumped out, all wiry muscle and meth-skinny fury. Dale Porter looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd made every wrong choice available and was now so deep in the hole he couldn't see daylight. His eyes had that glassy shine of recent drug use, pupils blown wide despite the afternoon sun. Clothes hung on a frame that had burned through fat and was starting to consume muscle. He was maybe 40 but looked 50, rode hard and put away wet every night of his life. His voice came out high and sharp, cracking with whatever chemicals were racing through his system. "Get away from her! She's mine! You got no right!" Frank stepped forward, positioning himself as the clear leader, the one Dale would have to go through first. "Sir, we've contacted law enforcement. They're on their way. I suggest you calm down and step back into your vehicle." Dale's laugh was ugly, brittle. "Law enforcement? You called the cops on me? For what? Taking my own kid for a drive?" Grace's voice cut through, stronger than before, finding courage in the presence of protectors. "I'm not your kid, and you weren't taking me for a drive. You were selling me." Something in Dale's face shifted, desperation bleeding through the bravado. "Shut up! You don't know what you're talking about! You stupid little—" Ray moved forward, his voice carrying the authority of command he'd never quite lost. "That's enough. You don't talk to her like that. Not while we're standing here." Dale's eyes darted between them, counting, calculating, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched by men who'd forgotten more about fighting than he'd ever learn. His hand dipped toward his waistband, and every biker tensed, but he pulled out a phone instead of a weapon. Tom's voice carried that quiet intensity that was somehow more threatening than shouting. "Who you calling, Dale? Your buyers? The people who paid you to deliver a child?" Dale's face twisted with something that might have been shame if there'd been any humanity left in him. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. These people, they don't mess around. I owe them money. A lot of money. They said if I didn't pay, they'd kill me. This was the only way." Carlos spoke for the first time, his voice sad rather than angry. "There's always a choice, brother. You just made the wrong ones." Dale's composure cracked, the phone forgotten in his shaking hand. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one with the bullet coming. They'll hunt me down. He focused on Grace suddenly, seeing not a child but a solution to his problem. "She has to come with me. I promise them. If I don't deliver, I'm dead. You hear me? Dead." Joe shifted slightly, putting more of his considerable bulk between Dale and Grace. "Then you're dead, because that little girl isn't going anywhere with you." Dale's eyes went wild, cornered animal desperate. He took 3 steps forward before Frank's hand came up, palm out, a command that had stopped charging enemy soldiers and worked just as well on tweaking stepfathers. The word came out flat, military, absolute. "No." Dale stopped, but his body vibrated with the need to do something. Anything, chemicals and desperation mixing into a volatile cocktail. "You can't do this. She's my responsibility. Her mother left her to me." Grace's voice trembled but held. "Mama didn't leave me to you. She died, and she'd hate what you've done. Hate what you tried to do." That broke something in Dale. He lunged forward with a sound like a wounded animal, not thinking, just reacting. Pete stepped into his path, timing it perfectly, turning the smaller man's momentum against him. Dale's feet tangled, his body went horizontal, and he hit the gravel hard enough to drive the air from his lungs in an explosive grunt. Before he could rise, Pete had a knee between his shoulder blades, holding him down with the weight and leverage of someone who'd rebuilt engines by hand for 30 years. Stay down. This doesn't have to get worse. Dale struggled, but he was outmatched. His phone had tumbled from his hand, landing face up in the dirt. It lit up with an incoming call, the screen showing just a number. No name. Everyone stared at it like it was a coiled snake. Ray picked it up carefully, showed it to Frank. The area code was Seattle. The number unfamiliar, but with that particular pattern that suggested burner phone, disposable communication, the kind people used when they didn't want records. Frank's decision was instant. Don't answer it. The phone rang 4 times, then went silent. 10 seconds later, a text message appeared. Status report, ETA? Grace whimpered, recognizing what that meant. Tom moved to her, kneeling down and speaking softly. Those people, whoever they are, they're not getting you. I promise. Dale's voice came out muffled by the gravel pressing against his face. You stupid old fools. You don't know who you're messing with. These aren't local thugs. This is organized, professional. They're already on their way. They'll kill all of you. Joe's voice carried a weight that made everyone look at him, remembering his son, remembering what loss looked like when it hollowed out a man. Then they can try. But they're not taking this child. Not today. Not ever. Sirens cut through the afternoon, still distant but approaching fast. Sheriff Jim Dockery had believed Ray enough to send cars without the usual 20 questions. Frank felt the tension ease slightly in his shoulders, then caught himself. Cops arriving just meant the immediate crisis was contained. The bigger threat, the people who'd paid for Grace, who were expecting delivery, they were still out there, still coming. Pete released Dale but stayed close, ready to pin him again if needed. Dale rolled onto his side, coughing, face bleeding from where it had met the gravel. He looked smaller now, defeated, the fight draining out as the meth-fueled energy started to crash. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Jim Dockery emerged from the first, 65 years old and looking every day of it, 3 weeks from retirement, and probably not thrilled to find his old partner Frank standing over what was clearly going to be a complicated situation. The second cruiser disgorged a younger deputy, hand resting near his weapon, eyes assessing the scene with the nervous energy of someone still proving himself. Jim took it all in with one long look. 6 bikers, 1 terrified child, 1 man bleeding on the ground, and the palpable sense that violence had been narrowly avoided. His eyes found Frank's, a whole conversation happening in that glance. Trust, history, the unspoken question of what the hell happened here. Frank spoke before Jim could. Jim, this is Grace Porter. She needs protection, immediate protection. Her stepfather was attempting to sell her to human traffickers. They're expecting delivery, soon. Jim's face hardened, decades of law enforcement crystallizing into focused intensity. He moved to Grace, crouching down with the careful movements of a man who'd talked to too many traumatized children. Hi, Grace. I'm Sheriff Dockery. You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened? Grace looked at Frank, seeking permission or reassurance. He nodded. She turned back to Jim and the words came out again, each telling seeming to make them more real, more awful. Dale's transformation after her mother's death, the strange men, the morning's deception, the phone call about the package. Jim's hand moved to his radio, his voice shifting into official mode. Dispatch, I need CPS emergency response to my location. Also need to run a background check on Dale Porter. Current address. He looked at Dale, who rattled off an address with the defeated monotone of a man who knew his life was over. The younger deputy had pulled Dale to his feet, cuffed him, was reading him his rights with the mechanical precision of academy training. Dale didn't resist, didn't argue, just stood there bleeding and broken. Jim's radio crackled with a response from dispatch, and his expression shifted, sharpened. He stepped away from Grace, motioning Frank to follow. When they were out of the girl's earshot, Jim's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. Dale Porter has 3 outstanding warrants. Drug possession with intent to distribute, assault, in violation of parole. He's been on our watch list for 6 months. Suspected involvement with a distribution ring operating out of Seattle. Frank felt the pieces clicking together. The people he owes money to. They're not loan sharks. They're the distributors. Jim nodded. And if they're expanding into human trafficking, we're looking at organized crime with resources, connections, and zero tolerance for witnesses. Grace is in serious danger. You all are, for that matter. Ray had joined them, having heard enough. So what's the play? She goes into protective custody? Jim rubbed his face, the weight of the situation visible in every line. That's the protocol. But Frank, you know as well as I do that our county resources are stretched thin. We've got one CPS worker covering 3 counties. Our witness protection is basically putting someone up in a motel and hoping nobody finds them. Frank looked back at Grace, sitting on Tom's motorcycle, Betty Hayes having materialized from Tom's phone call with warm food and maternal comfort. The girl was eating a sandwich like she hadn't seen food in days, which she probably hadn't, not proper food anyway. His voice came out certain, the way it had when he'd made command decisions in rice paddies and jungle clearings. She stays with me. Jim started to shake his head. Frank, you're not a licensed foster parent. There are procedures, then we follow the procedures. Emergency placement, whatever it takes. But Jim, that little girl just trusted 6 complete strangers with her life because the system, her stepfather, the people who should have protected her, they all failed her. I'm not handing her over to another institution that might fail her again. Ray crossed his arms. We're all in. Whatever Frank needs, whatever she needs. The Brotherhood takes care of its own. Jim looked at the 6 old bikers, seeing beyond the leather and the scars to the men underneath. The soldiers who'd gone to war when their country called. The fathers and husbands and workers who'd built lives worth living. He sighed, a sound like air escaping from something that had held pressure too long. His decision came out resigned but resolute. I'll make some calls. Emergency foster placement, pending full investigation. But Frank, this is temporary. And if those traffickers are half as organized as I think they are, you're painting a target on yourself, on all of you. Frank's response was simple. Wouldn't be the first time. While Jim coordinated with CPS and his deputies processed Dale, the bikers gathered around Grace. She'd finished her sandwich and was eyeing the motorcycles with the fascination children had before fear taught them caution. Carlos knelt beside her, his teacher's voice gentle. Grace, you understand what's happening? You're going to stay with Mr. Frank for a little while, until things get sorted out. He's a good man, all of us. We're going to make sure you're safe. She nodded, then surprised everyone by asking, Can I still go to school? Tom laughed, a sound of pure relief that a child could think about normal things like school after what she'd been through. Absolutely, we'll make sure you get to school, do your homework, all of it. Grace looked up at Frank with those old young eyes that had seen too much. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Frank knelt despite his protesting knees, despite the ache in his back from years of hard living. He looked at this child who'd run through a forest in bare feet, who'd trusted her survival to the kindness of strangers, who was still brave enough to ask questions when most kids would just be crying. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he usually kept locked down. Because a long time ago, some people helped me when I needed it, Austin, because you deserve better than what life's handed you so far. Because it's the right thing to do. And because, he paused, surprised by the truth of what he was about to say, because I think you're supposed to, I think we're supposed to find you. Grace's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she did something that broke through Frank's carefully maintained emotional armor. She reached out and took his weathered, scarred hand in her small, scratched one. Her voice came out small but steady. Thank you for stopping. Those 4 words hung in the air like a benediction, like a purpose, like the answer to a question none of them had known they were asking. Jim returned with paperwork and a tired-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Patricia Morrison from Child Protective Services. She had the worn-down look of someone who'd seen too many cases with too few resources, but her eyes were kind when she looked at Grace. The bureaucracy unfolded with the predictable tedium of government work. Forms in triplicate background checks that Frank knew he'd pass because he'd kept his nose clean for 62 years. Emergency placement authorization that would last 72 hours while full investigation proceeded. Dale was loaded into a cruiser, still silent, still defeated. As they closed the door, he looked at Grace one last time. She looked back, her expression unreadable. Then the cruiser pulled away, taking him toward a jail cell in a future that had stopped including freedom. The sun had started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Frank why he'd fallen in love with Montana in the first place. Grace was yawning now, adrenaline crash hitting hard, her small body starting to shake with exhaustion. Patricia Morrison handed Frank a stack of information: emergency contacts, counseling resources, guidelines for trauma-informed care. She spoke in the flat tone of someone who'd given this speech too many times. She'll need therapy, probably medication for sleep, at least short-term. The nightmares will be bad. Don't be surprised if she regresses, wets the bed, has panic attacks. She's been through hell. Frank took the papers. I was in Vietnam. I know what nightmares look like. I know what it takes to come back from hell. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Then you know it's not about being strong. It's about being there. Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I can do that. Can you? Patricia looked at the assembled bikers, the motorcycles, the whole scene. Because a lot of well-meaning people can't. The reality of a traumatized child is different from the idea of helping. She'll test you, push you away, make you want to quit. Frank met her gaze without flinching. Lady, I spent 13 months in a jungle where people tried to kill me every day. I watched friends die. I came home to a country that spit on my uniform. I buried a wife I loved more than my own life. I don't quit. Not ever. Patricia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, 72 hours. Then we reassess. But Mr. Brennan, she softened, dropping the professional distance. I hope you mean it, because that little girl in there, she's already been abandoned once. She can't survive it again. She won't have to. The arrangements were made. Grace would ride with Frank, Ray would lead, Pete and Joe would bracket them, Tom and Carlos would bring up the rear. A protective formation, the same they'd used in convoy duty 40 years ago, updated for a different kind of precious cargo. Betty Hayes produced a helmet from Tom's saddlebag, sized for his youngest grandchild, and helped Grace put it on. The girl looked tiny, perched on the back of Frank's Harley, her arms wrapped around his waist with a grip that spoke of desperation and hope mingled together. Frank's voice carried over his shoulder. You hold on tight, Grace. Don't let go, no matter what. You understand? Her response vibrated through his back. I understand. Good, because we've got about 20 miles to my place. You ever been on a motorcycle before? No, sir. Well, you're about to learn why we love it. You feel scared, you squeeze tighter. You feel sick, you tap my shoulder. You feel free, well, you just enjoy it. Jim Dockery pulled Frank aside one last time before they mounted up. Frank, be straight with me. Are you ready for this? Really ready? Because once you start, you can't half-ass it. Frank looked at Grace, small and vulnerable, but not broken, not defeated. He thought about his house, empty except for memories and regrets. He thought about his wife, Sarah, dead 5 years now, who'd always wanted children but couldn't have them. He thought about the hole in his life that he'd filled with motorcycles and Brotherhood, but never quite filled completely. His answer was simple and true. I've been ready my whole life, just didn't know it until now. 6 engines roared to life, that familiar thunder that always made Frank feel more alive. Grace tensed behind him, then relaxed slightly as the vibration became rhythm, as terror gave way to possibility. They pulled out onto Highway 89, formation tight, purpose clear. The sun painted their shadows long across the asphalt. 6 old bikers and 1 precious cargo, heading toward an uncertain future with absolute certainty of purpose. Frank felt Grace's grip adjust, felt her settle into the ride, felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, like maybe the road ahead mattered again. Like maybe there was a reason he'd survived the war. Survived losing Sarah, survived 62 years of hard living and harder choices. Like maybe he'd been waiting his whole life to stop on this particular highway, on this particular Sunday, for this particular child. Behind them, Dale Porter's truck sat abandoned, a crime scene now. Ahead of them, Frank's house waited, about to become a home again. Around them, the Montana wilderness stretched endless and indifferent. But inside that protective formation, warmth grew, fragile, new, precious. Grace spoke, her voice almost lost in the engine's roar. "Mr. Frank?" "Yeah? Am I really safe now?" Frank's throat tightened. He thought about the people Dale had called, the traffickers expecting delivery, the danger that followed children like Grace, the reality that safety was never guaranteed, that evil didn't stop just because good people stood in its way. But he also thought about 5 brothers riding beside him, about a community that would rally when called, about the stubborn refusal to let darkness win that had kept him alive when lesser men had folded. His answer carried the weight of a promise he intended to keep with his last breath. "You're safe, Grace. I give you my word. And my word is all I've got that's worth a damn." The formation rode on through the gathering dusk, 6 old warriors and 1 young survivor, heading into the unknown with nothing but conviction and brotherhood to light the way. The sun touched the horizon, painting the world in blood and gold. Grace's grip tightened slightly, not from fear now, but from something else. The beginning of trust, the first fragile steps toward healing. The understanding that sometimes strangers became family, and family became the thing worth fighting for. Frank felt it too, that shift, that change. The road ahead was still long, still dangerous, still uncertain. But for the first time in 5 years, since Sarah's funeral, since the last shovel of dirt on her grave, since he'd wondered if his life had any purpose left, for the first time he rode toward tomorrow with something more than habit driving him forward. He rode toward home with a reason to get there. Frank's house sat at the end of a gravel drive that wound through 20 acres of scrub pine and wild grass, far enough from town that neighbors meant a half-mile walk. The structure was simple: 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1987, and a living room dominated by a wood stove that did most of the heating when Montana winters turned brutal. Sarah had loved this place, called it their sanctuary. After she'd gone, it had become more tomb than home, a museum of memories Frank couldn't quite bring himself to change. Grace stood in the doorway, helmet still clutched in her small hands, taking in the space with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned to read environments for danger. Her eyes cataloged exits, hiding spots, the distance to the door. Frank recognized the behavior. He'd done the same thing his first week back from Vietnam, unable to sleep without knowing escape routes. Betty Hayes had beaten them there somehow, her sedan parked in the drive, interior lights already glowing through the windows. She emerged carrying grocery bags, her grandmother's instinct having anticipated needs before they were spoken. Tom followed her inside with armloads of supplies that had materialized from his truck: blankets, pillows, a stuffed bear that had belonged to one of his grandchildren. Betty's voice carried that no-nonsense warmth that grandmothers perfected over decades. "Grace, honey, let's get you cleaned up and fed proper. Frank, you got clean towels?" "Linen closet, second shelf." Frank was already moving toward the spare bedroom, the room that had been meant for children that never came, that had held Sarah's craft supplies and then nothing but dust after cancer took her. He opened the door for the first time in months, confronting the emptiness he'd been avoiding. Ray appeared beside him. "We'll get it set up. You focus on Grace." The Brotherhood moved with practiced efficiency born from decades of working together. Pete found tools and assembled a bed frame Tom had somehow acquired. Joe hung curtains that Betty had brought, cheerful yellow things that transformed the space from storage to sanctuary. Carlos swept and mopped, his teacher's attention to detail, ensuring no corner stayed neglected. Within an hour, the room held a bed with clean sheets, a small desk, a lamp that cast warm light, and the stuffed bear sitting prominently on the pillow. Grace stood in the bathroom doorway, Betty having helped her shower and dress in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her thin frame. She looked younger without the dirt, more fragile without the adrenaline. Her feet were bandaged where rocks and roots had torn the skin during her desperate flight through the forest. Her arms showed the fading yellow-green of older bruises beneath the fresh scratches. Frank's hands curled into fists at the evidence of sustained abuse, forced them to relax. Dale was in custody. The immediate threat was contained. What Grace needed now wasn't his anger, but his steadiness. Betty guided her to the kitchen table where food waited. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of simple meal that spoke of normalcy and care. Grace ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger, her body remembering it had needs beyond survival. The bikers gave her space but stayed present, their bulk filling the small house with a sense of security. Tom's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to answer, returning with an expression that made everyone look up. His voice carried careful control. That was Jim Dockery. Dale's in lockup, but he's talking. Claims the traffickers were supposed to pick Grace up at a location 30 miles north of where we found her. Dead drop style. Dale leaves her. They collect. No direct contact. Frank absorbed this. Timing? Supposed to happen 2 hours ago. Dale was late because Grace ran. The buyers are expecting their merchandise. Grace flinched at the word merchandise, her fork clattering against the plate. Carlos moved closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Ray leaned against the counter. So they know something went wrong. They'll be looking for answers. Joe's construction site pragmatism cut through. We need to secure this place. Windows, doors, perimeter. Make it a hard target. Frank nodded. Pete, you and Joe handle physical security. Ray, inventory weapons, legal and registered only. We do this right. Tom, coordinate with Jim. Keep lines of communication open. Carlos, help Betty get Grace settled for the night. The Brotherhood dispersed to tasks, each man falling into roles that felt natural. Frank found himself alone with Grace, the girl who'd been in his life for less than 6 hours but had somehow become his responsibility, his purpose. She looked up at him with those old eyes. They're coming, aren't they? The bad men. They're coming here. Frank pulled out a chair, sat across from her, treating her like the intelligent person she was rather than a child to be sheltered from truth. Maybe, probably. But Grace, you see these men? My brothers? We've been in worse situations than this. We know how to protect what matters. What if someone gets hurt because of me? Then they get hurt doing what's right. That's a choice each of us made the moment we stopped on that highway. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose to be in danger. The only person responsible is Dale and the evil people he got involved with. Grace's fingers traced patterns on the tablecloth. My mama used to say there's more good people than bad, but the bad ones are louder, so they seem like more. Frank felt his throat tighten. Your mama was right and smart. You must miss her something fierce. The tears came then, finally the shock wearing off enough to allow grief. Grace cried with the whole body sobs of a child who'd lost the one person who'd loved her unconditionally, who'd been holding it together through terror and flight and rescue, because breaking down meant stopping, and stopping meant capture. Betty materialized from somewhere, wrapping Grace in arms that had comforted decades of children and grandchildren. She rocked the girl gently, making wordless sounds of comfort, letting her cry it out. Frank stood, feeling useless, but Betty caught his eye and nodded. This was necessary. This was healing. Outside, night had fallen complete, Montana darkness so thick it felt solid. Pete worked by flashlight, reinforcing window locks with brackets he'd fashioned from hardware store supplies. Joe measured sight lines, identifying approaches an attacker might use. Ray had laid out Frank's small arsenal on the kitchen table. 2 hunting rifles, a shotgun, Frank's service .45 from Vietnam, and Pete's .38 snub-nose. Legal, registered, and hopefully unnecessary. Tom returned from his truck with a police scanner that crackled with routine traffic, domestic disturbance on the east side, possible DUI on Highway 2, nothing related to their situation. He set it up on the counter where its glow added to the gathering equipment that was turning Frank's home into something resembling a command post. Carlos hung up from a phone call, his expression troubled. Talk to Father Morrison at St. Michael's. The church network is activated. If we need emergency shelter or backup, the community will respond. Frank appreciated the gesture, even as he wondered how many civilians he was willing to put in danger. The traffickers Dale had described weren't street-level thugs. They were organized, professional, and accustomed to eliminating obstacles. Grace had cried herself out, her sobs diminishing to hiccups. Betty guided her toward the newly prepared bedroom, but the girl hesitated at the threshold, looking back at Frank with sudden panic. Her voice came out small. "Don't leave. Please don't leave while I'm sleeping." Frank crossed to her, kneeling to eye level. "I'll be right here, Grace. All of us will. We're taking shifts, someone awake and watching all night, every night until this is resolved. You're not alone, not anymore." She studied his face, searching for deception, finding only weathered honesty. Finally, she nodded and let Betty lead her inside. The door stayed open, light from the hallway spilling in, childhood fears of darkness given validity by adult experiences of genuine monsters. The bikers gathered in the living room, voices low, postures revealing the military training most of them shared. Ray spread a hand-drawn map of the property on the coffee table, marking entry points and defensive positions with the same care he'd once used planning patrol routes through hostile territory. Pete tapped the northern approach. Most likely vector if they're coming from the highway. Trees provide cover almost to the house. We need motion sensors, maybe tripwires. Tom shook his head. Tripwires could catch civilians. Mailman, meter reader, hell, one of my grandkids decides to visit. We can't booby-trap the place. Joe suggested security cameras. Ray's got them at the hardware store. We wire the perimeter. At least we get advance warning. Frank listened to the planning, appreciating the effort while recognizing the fundamental problem. We're preparing for a siege, but we don't know if they're even coming. Don't know their numbers, their capabilities, their timeline. We're shadowboxing. Carlos, who'd been quiet, spoke up. So we get information. Dale's in custody. He knows these people. Jim could leverage that, offer a deal for cooperation. Ray's laugh was bitter. Dale's terrified of them. You saw his face. He'd rather take his chances with the law than risk their revenge. Then we make him more afraid of us. The words came from Pete, surprising everyone. His expression was cold, distant, the look of a man who'd done things he didn't talk about. We explained very clearly what happens to child traffickers in prison, how the other inmates handle them, how protective custody is just delayed suffering. We give him a choice, help us stop these people, or face what's waiting for him inside. Frank studied Pete, seeing past the grease-stained mechanic to the combat engineer who'd cleared tunnels and bunkers, who understood the leverage of fear. It was ruthless, manipulative, and probably effective. It also crossed lines that good men were supposed to respect. Tom voiced what Frank was thinking. We're not interrogators. We're not cops. We start playing those games, we become what we're fighting against. No, Joe's voice carried absolute certainty. What we're fighting against sells children. There's no equivalence. We do what's necessary to protect Grace. Everything else is just philosophy. The argument might have continued, but Betty emerged from Grace's room, closing the door gently behind her. Her expression was troubled. She's asleep, finally. Poor thing, cried herself out. But Frank, she needs more than we can give her. Professional help, therapy, someone trained in childhood trauma. Frank nodded. Patricia Morrison left me a list of resources. I'll start making calls tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late. Betty's bluntness was maternal, protective. That girl's been through hell. Every hour we wait is an hour her mind is processing trauma without support. She needs help now. Ray pulled out his phone. My daughter-in-law is a counselor, works with kids. Let me call her. While Ray stepped outside, Frank moved to Grace's doorway, watching her sleep. Even unconscious, she wasn't peaceful. Her hands clenched the blankets. Her face twitched with dreams that were probably nightmares. The stuffed bear lay beside her, one arm draped over it like it might escape. He thought about Sarah, about the children they'd planned to have, about the life that cancer had stolen. He thought about his own childhood, about a father who'd shown love through provision and protection rather than words. He thought about Vietnam, about the kids there who'd gotten caught in crossfire, who'd looked at American soldiers with the same desperate hope Grace had shown on the highway. Maybe this was why he'd survived. Not luck, not skill, but destiny preparing him for this moment. this child, this chance to protect someone who desperately needed protecting. Betty joined him at the doorway. You're thinking too loud. I can hear the gears turning from here. Just wondering if I'm equipped for this. I'm 62 years old, set in my ways. Haven't raised a child, never even had one. What makes me think I can help her? Betty's hand found his shoulder. Frank Brennan, I've known you 20 years. You're one of the best men I've ever met. You might not have raised children, but you've protected people your whole life. That girl needs protection right now more than she needs parenting expertise. She needs someone who won't quit on her. You don't quit. It's not in you. She deserves more than a broken down old biker. She deserves someone who stops when others drive past, someone who keeps promises, someone who understands nightmares because he's had his own. Betty's voice softened. You're exactly what she needs, Frank. You just can't see it yet. Ray returned, expression cautiously optimistic. Jennifer can be here tomorrow morning. She's cleared her schedule. No charge. She says anyone who rescues a kid from traffickers gets her services free. The scanner crackled with sudden activity. All units be advised. Black SUV reported stolen from Seattle area, last seen heading east on I-90. Possible connection to ongoing trafficking investigation. Proceed with caution. Every man in the room tensed. Seattle, the same city Dale's buyers were from. I-90 led straight into Montana. Tom grabbed his phone, dialing Jim Dockery. The conversation was brief, tense. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Jim says the FBI's been tracking a trafficking ring operating out of Seattle for 2 years. Multi-state operation. The SUV theft was reported by a shell corporation that's flagged in their investigation. If it's heading this way, it's not coincidence. Frank felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settling over him, the world sharpening into essential elements. Threat, assets, objectives. The threat was incoming. Professional, motivated. His assets were 5 aging bikers and whatever community support he could mobilize. His objective was singular. Keep Grace safe. Joe voiced what everyone was thinking. They're coming tonight. Pete was already moving toward the weapons. Then we prepare. Defensive positions, clear fields of fire, fallback plan if they breach. Carlos crossed himself. We should evacuate Grace. Get her somewhere safe while we handle this. Frank shook his head. Where? If they're organized enough to track her here, they can track her anywhere in the county. At least here we control the terrain. We know the approaches. We have preparation time. Ray checked his watch. 90 minutes from Seattle if they're pushing speed limits, less if they're not worried about cops. We need to move. The next hour transformed Frank's property into something resembling a firebase. Motion sensors borrowed from Ray's hardware store were placed at key approaches. Tom rigged his truck's spotlight to cover the northern tree line. Joe stacked firewood strategically to create cover positions. Pete distributed the weapons, ensuring everyone knew fields of fire and rules of engagement. Frank insisted on clear parameters. We don't shoot unless directly threatened. We don't start the violence. But if they bring it to us, if they threaten Grace, we end it. Understand? Every man nodded, the gravity of what they were preparing for evident in their expressions. They were civilians now, had been for decades, but the soldier underneath never quite died. It just waited for the moment it was needed again. Betty refused to leave despite Frank's insistence. That child wakes up scared. She needs a woman's voice. You boys play army if you must, but I'm staying. Frank didn't have the energy to argue, and truthfully, her presence was calming. She settled into a chair near Grace's room, knitting needles clicking with meditative rhythm. A grandmother standing watch over a child who wasn't hers but needed her anyway. The waiting was the hardest part. Combat vets knew this. The anticipation worse than the actual violence. The mind racing through scenarios. The body flooding with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. They took shifts. 2 men on watch while others rested. Though rest was theoretical, nobody slept. Midnight came and went. The scanner remained quiet except for routine traffic. No black SUVs, no suspicious activity. The moon rose, 3/4 full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Frank stood at the window, watching his property with eyes that had learned to see in jungle darkness. Beside him, Ray did the same. Both men silent, both thinking about the same thing, how quickly life could pivot from routine to crisis, how a Sunday ride could become a last stand. Ray finally spoke. You really think they'll come? Yes. Tonight? If they're professionals, they'll come when we're tired, when our guard drops. Dawn, probably. 4 or 5 a.m. when the body's natural rhythms are lowest. Then we've got a few hours. Ray settled into a chair that gave him a view of the northern approach. Frank, after this is over, after Grace is safe, you really going to try for permanent custody? Frank hadn't let himself think that far ahead, focusing only on the immediate crisis. But the question forced him to confront what came after, the long-term implications of the choice he'd made on that highway. His answer surprised him with its certainty. Yeah, I am. If she'll have me, if the system allows it. Yeah. You know what you're signing up for? Raising a traumatized kid, the therapy, the nightmares, the behavioral issues. It's not like the movies, Frank. It's years of hard work with no guarantees. I know, but Ray, when I looked at her today, running out of those trees, terrified and desperate, I saw a second chance. Not just for her, for me. Sarah and I, we always wanted kids. That dream died with her. But maybe this is how it was supposed to happen. Maybe I needed to be 62, alone, broken in enough to understand what she's going through. Ray smiled, the kind of knowing expression that came from decades of friendship. Sarah would be proud of you. Sarah would have already adopted Grace and 3 other kids besides. She had a bigger heart than I ever did. You're doing okay in the heart department, Frank. Better than Kay. The moment of sentimentality passed as headlights appeared on the distant highway, too far away to be immediate threat, but close enough to raise alertness. The vehicle passed without slowing, some late-night traveler, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the house, set back from the road. Tom relieved Pete at the eastern window, their handoff silent and smooth. Carlos made coffee that nobody really wanted, but everyone drank, needing the ritual more than the caffeine. Joe checked weapons for the 3rd time, ensuring chambers were clear, safeties engaged until needed. Betty's knitting needles maintained their steady rhythm, a sound of normalcy in the abnormal situation. She'd been through her own crisis decades ago, Tom had once mentioned, a home invasion that had left her surprisingly calm in the face of danger. She'd stared down a man with a gun and talked him into leaving through sheer force of maternal authority. The same energy radiated from her now, protective and immovable. 3 a.m. arrived with no incident. Frank's combat instincts were screaming that something was wrong, that the threat was real but manifesting differently than expected. He pulled out his phone, called Jim Dockery despite the hour. Jim answered on the second ring, his voice alert, clearly not sleeping either. Frank, was just about to call you. The SUV was spotted in Missoula, heading east. They're 2 hours out, maybe less. Do we have a count? How many people? Highway Patrol clocked 3 individuals. Couldn't determine gender. SUV has tinted windows. FBI scrambling to get authorization for a traffic stop. But these jurisdictional things take time. Frank's frustration leaked through. Jim, we don't have time. If they get past checkpoints, they'll be here before dawn. I know. I've got 2 deputies en route to your location. It's all I can spare without leaving the rest of the county uncovered. Frank, if this goes sideways, it won't. We're ready. That's what I'm afraid of. You boys haven't been soldiers in 40 years. These traffickers, they're young, armed, and they don't have rules of engagement. Promise me you won't do anything stupid. Frank thought about Grace sleeping in the next room, about the bruises on her arms, about Dale's casual description of selling his stepdaughter to buy himself time. He thought about the other children these people had taken, were planning to take, would continue to take if nobody stopped them. His promise was honest but incomplete. I'll do what's necessary to protect that girl. That's all I can promise. Jim sighed, recognizing the non-answer. Deputies should be there in 30 minutes. Try to stay alive until then, would you? The line went dead. Frank relayed the information to his brothers, watching their expressions harden with resolve. 2 hours until possible contact. 30 minutes until reinforcements. The math was simple and unforgiving. Pete moved to the weapons, his hands steady despite the situation. We should wake Grace, get her ready to move, if we need to evacuate. Betty shook her head firmly. That child needs sleep more than she needs fear. She's safe in that room, and she'll stay safe. You boys make sure of it. There was no arguing with Betty in protective mode. Frank found himself grateful for her certainty, her refusal to let panic dictate actions. Carlos suggested, we could call for community backup. Father Morrison, the veterans groups, people who'd stand with us. Tom rejected the idea immediately. And put civilians in the line of fire? These are professionals, Carlos. Combat vets are one thing, but bringing in people who've never faced violence? That's how bystanders get killed. So 6 old men is better? 6 old men who know what they're doing, yeah. Better than 20 well-meaning civilians who don't. The argument was cut short by the motion sensors activating, a soft beep from the monitor Ray had set up. Northern approach, multiple targets, moving with tactical spacing through the tree line. Frank's voice came out calm, commanding. Everyone to positions. Safety's off, fingers off triggers until I give the word. Betty, get Grace up and into the bathroom. It's the most interior room, best protection. Betty moved immediately, her age not slowing the maternal urgency. The bikers dispersed to their assigned positions, Ray at the north window with the hunting rifle, Pete covering the eastern approach, Tom watching the west, Joe at the southern exposure. Carlos floating as backup. Frank took the central position where he could coordinate and reinforce wherever needed. The scanner crackled. All units, black SUV spotted on County Road 47, approximately 5 miles from. The transmission cut to static. Frank's gut clenched. County Road 47 was 3 miles from his property. They'd arrived faster than expected, and they'd somehow jammed or disabled the police scanner. These weren't amateurs. These were professionals executing a plan. The motion sensors showed 5, figures advancing through the trees with the careful spacing of trained operators. They moved in bounds, one team providing cover, while another advanced textbook small unit tactics. Pete's voice carried across the house, tight with adrenaline. Frank, these guys know what they're doing. This is military precision. Ray confirmed, I count 5, possibly 6. Armed, moving with purpose. ETA 3 minutes to the house. Frank made rapid calculations. 5 against 6 favored them slightly in numbers, but the attackers had youth, surprise, and professional training. The bikers had experience, defensive positions, and motivation. It would be close. Betty emerged from Grace's room. She's awake, scared but holding together. Asked me if you'd be okay. I told her you would be. Frank met her eyes. I will be. We all will be. Take care of her, Betty. You just make sure I have someone to give her back to. The attackers reached the property line, pausing for final coordination. Frank could see them now in the moonlight. Dark clothing, tactical gear, weapons that caught silver glints. One figure appeared to be giving hand signals, directing the assault. Frank's combat training took over, 40 years falling away until he was 22 again, shared and determined in equal measure. Wait for them to commit. Let them think they have surprise. On my mark, lights go on. We challenge them verbally. They back off. Nobody gets hurt. They advance. He didn't finish. Everyone understood. They advance. This becomes a firefight. The attackers move forward, spreading out to hit the house from multiple angles simultaneously. Professional, coordinated, dangerous. Frank waited, counting heartbeats, timing the moment. When the lead attacker was 15 yards from the house, close enough to be committed but far enough to retreat if given the chance, Frank gave the signal. Tom's truck spotlight blazed to life, turning night into harsh noon. Every window in the house suddenly framed a biker with a weapon, the defensive positions revealed in coordinated display. Frank's voice boomed through the open window, carrying authority earned through combat and command. That's far enough. Willow County Sheriff has been notified. You're trespassing on private property. Back off now and nobody gets hurt. The attackers froze, clearly not expecting organized resistance. The lead figure raised a hand, halting the advance. For a moment, possibility hung in the air. Violence narrowly avoided, reason prevailing. Then the lead attacker's radio crackled, audible in the sudden silence. A voice distorted but commanding. Execute! Everything happened at once. The lead attacker's weapon came up, muzzle flash splitting the darkness before sound caught up. The bullet smashed into the window frame, 6 inches from Ray's head, wood splintering into fragments that peppered his face. Ray dropped below the sill, his combat reflexes overriding the 40 years since he'd last been under fire. Frank's return shot was instinctive, controlled, aimed low at the attacker's legs rather than center mass. The .45 bucked in his hand, the report deafening in the small house. The round caught the lead attacker in the thigh, spinning him sideways with a scream that was more surprise than pain. The man went down hard, weapon clattering across gravel. The other attackers scattered, finding cover behind trees and Frank's truck, returning fire with the disciplined bursts of trained operators. Windows shattered, bullets punching through walls that suddenly seemed paper thin. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine and fear. Pete's shotgun boomed from the eastern window, buckshot shredding bark and sending one attacker diving for better cover. Tom's hunting rifle cracked methodically, forcing the western approach to ground. Joe and Carlos held their positions, weapons ready but not firing, waiting for clear targets in the chaos. From Grace's bathroom sanctuary came a muffled scream. Betty's voice followed, calm and steady despite everything. We're okay. Stay focused. Frank processed the tactical situation with crystalline clarity, born from training that never quite left. 5 attackers, 1 wounded, 4 still mobile and armed. His people held the house but were pinned, unable to maneuver. The attackers had cover and numbers, could wait them out or attempt to flank. The deputies were still 20 minutes out. Might as well be 20 hours. This was going to get worse before it got better. Ray's voice cut through the gunfire. Frank, 2 breaking north, trying to circle around. Pete responded before Frank could give orders, his combat engineer instincts reading the battlefield. I've got the angle. His shotgun roared twice more, forcing the flanking attempt to abort. The wounded lead attacker was crawling toward his weapon, leaving a blood trail black in the moonlight. Frank considered shooting again, decided against it. The man was already out of the fight. No need to escalate to lethal force if it could be avoided. Then the wounded man reached his weapon, rolled onto his back, and fired a burst toward the house. Bullets stitched across the wall, one punching through into the kitchen where Carlos stood. Carlos grunted, staggered, his left arm suddenly useless and bleeding. Joe was at his side instantly. How bad? Carlos examined the wound with surprising calm. Through and through. Missed the bone. I'll live. He switched his pistol to his right hand, his face pale but determined. Stay in the fight. The attackers regrouped, coordinating through hand signals Frank could barely make out in the strobing muzzle flashes and spotlight glare. They were preparing for another push, this time with better understanding of the defense. Frank made a command decision. Ray, Tom, suppressing fire on my mark. Keep their heads down. Pete, Joe, be ready to reinforce wherever they hit hardest. The coordinated response drove the attackers back into deeper cover, buying precious seconds. Frank used them to reassess. They couldn't hold indefinitely. Eventually ammunition would run low, or the attackers would find a weak point, or someone would get unlucky. They needed to change the dynamic, shift from defense to something that broke the stalemate. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The deputies were arriving faster than expected, or maybe time was just distorting under stress. Either way, reinforcements were close. The lead attacker seemed to hear them too. His radio crackled again, the distorted voice giving orders Frank couldn't make out. The attackers began withdrawing, moving by bounds back toward the tree line, laying down covering fire that kept the bikers pinned. Pete started to rise for a better shot, but Frank stopped him. Let them go. We've got wounded. Mission's protecting Grace, not revenge. The attackers melted into the forest, their retreat as professional as their assault. Within seconds, they'd vanished, leaving only the wounded lead attacker lying in Frank's gravel driveway, his hands now empty, his fight finished. Blue and red lights strobed through the trees as 2 sheriff's cruisers skidded to a stop, deputies emerging with weapons drawn, assessing the war zone Frank's property had become. Jim Dockery's voice cut through. Frank, status. All accounted for. One hostile down and wounded in the driveway. Others retreated north. Carlos took a round through the arm. Needs medical. The deputies moved with practiced efficiency, securing the wounded attacker, calling for ambulances, establishing a perimeter. Jim approached the house, his expression mixing relief and fury. You were supposed to wait for us. Frank's laugh was bitter. They didn't give us that option. Inside, Betty had emerged from the bathroom with Grace, the girl's eyes wide with shock but no tears. She'd heard everything, lived through a firefight in her first night of supposed safety. Frank's heart broke watching her process the violence, the realization that danger hadn't ended just because she'd been rescued. Grace moved to him with surprising steadiness. Are you hurt? Frank checked himself, finding no injuries beyond ringing ears. I'm fine, sweetheart. We're all fine. Mr. Carlos is bleeding. Betty was already working on Carlos, her first aid training from decades of motherhood pressed into service. The wound was ugly, but not life-threatening. The bullet having passed through the fleshy part of his upper arm without hitting major vessels. Carlos bore it with stoic silence, his face gray but composed. Grace watched Betty work, then asked the question Frank had been dreading. Will they come back? Honesty felt cruel but necessary. I don't know, Grace. Maybe. Then you can't keep me. It's too dangerous. For you, for everyone. Frank knelt despite his protesting knees, ignoring Jim Dockery and the deputies and the chaos swirling around them. Grace, listen to me. Those men came here because they're evil and they see you as property to be bought and sold. But they failed. They failed because good men stood between them and you, and will keep standing there as long as it takes. But Mr. Carlos, Carlos interrupted, his voice strong despite the pain. Grace, I've been hurt worse falling off my bike. This is nothing. And Frank's right. We don't quit. Not on you. Not ever. Ambulances arrived, paramedics swarming to treat Carlos and the wounded attacker. Jim Dockery coordinated with his deputies, setting up a proper perimeter, calling for K-9 units to track the retreating attackers. The night exploded into organized chaos, professionals doing their jobs, while Frank's small house became the center of a criminal investigation. FBI agent Sarah Chen arrived 90 minutes later, her tactical team turning Frank's property into a federal crime scene. She was 40, compact and intense, with the kind of focused energy that came from years hunting predators. Her first action was securing Grace, ensuring the girl was physically unharmed before beginning the delicate process of extracting information. Grace told her story again, this time with an agent who understood the larger context. Chen's expression grew progressively darker as Grace described Dale's activities, the phone calls, the implication of an organized network. When Grace finished, Chen turned to Frank with a look of professional respect mixed with concern. Her voice carried authority. Mr. Brennan, you and your friends just engaged with members of the Westbrook Trafficking Organization. Multi-state operation, 2 years of investigation, extremely dangerous. You're lucky to be alive. Frank's response was dry. Didn't feel like luck. The man you shot is Nathan Reeves, former military contractor, suspected in at least 3 murders related to witness elimination. He's talking now, probably hoping for a deal. Says they were hired to retrieve lost merchandise and eliminate any witnesses. The casual brutality of the description made Frank's stomach turn. Grace was sitting across the room with Betty, pretending not to listen but hearing everything. The idea that people existed who saw her as merchandise, who'd kill to protect their business interests. It was a darkness Frank had known existed but had hoped never to confront directly. Chen continued. The attack tonight was a retrieval operation, yes, but also a message. They wanted to demonstrate that interfering with their business has consequences. They failed, which means they'll either escalate or back off entirely. We won't know which until we roll up more of their network. Ray, his face still spotted with wood splinters. So what's the play? Grace goes into federal protection? Chen shook her head. Witness protection is for witnesses who will testify in cases we're ready to prosecute. We're not there yet. We need more evidence, more cooperation from people inside the organization. Right now, Grace is a victim who escaped, valuable but not critical to prosecution. Tom's voice carried an edge. So she's just bait. You're hoping they try again and so you can catch them. No, Chen's response was sharp. Grace's safety is paramount. But realistically, keeping her in one location when they know where she is, that's not sustainable. We need to move her, establish a safe house with federal protection until we can dismantle this organization. Frank felt Grace's eyes on him across the room. She was waiting to see if he'd fight to keep her or let the professionals take over. The smart play was obvious. Let the FBI with their resources and expertise handle protection. But the promise he'd made, the connection they'd formed, the look in her eyes when she'd asked if he'd keep her safe, those weren't things he could just hand off to another institution. His decision came out firm. She stays with me. Chen started to object, but Frank cut her off. Agent Chen, I respect your expertise, but that little girl has been failed by every adult who was supposed to protect her. Her stepfather sold her. The system that should have caught the abuse didn't. Now you want me to hand her over to another government program and hope it works out? No, she trusts me. She trusts us. That trust is worth protecting. Mr. Brennan, trust doesn't stop bullets. No, but walls do. Security systems do. Armed guards do. You want to protect her? Then help me make this place secure. Station agents here. Provide resources. But don't ask me to abandon her to bureaucracy while you build your case. Chen studied him for a long moment, then surprised Frank by nodding. Okay. Conditional agreement. FBI provides security detail, 2 agents on site at all times. We install proper security systems, upgrade physical defenses. You follow our protocols for Grace's protection. First sign this arrangement isn't working, she goes to federal custody. Agreed? Frank extended his hand. Agreed. They shook, and Frank felt the weight of responsibility settle even heavier. He'd just committed to keeping Grace safe with the full knowledge that professional killers wanted her dead. But looking at her face, seeing the relief that he hadn't given up on her, he knew it was the right choice, even if it was the dangerous one. The next week passed in a blur of activity that transformed Frank's simple home into something resembling a fortress. FBI technicians installed security cameras covering every approach, motion sensors that could detect a cat at 50 yards, reinforced doors and windows with ballistic film, and established a communications center in Frank's garage. 2 agents rotated 12-hour shifts, professional and polite, but unmistakably armed and vigilant. Grace adjusted to the new reality with the resilience of children who'd learned that stability was temporary. She attended school under an assumed name, with agents driving her there and back, her classroom visible from the hallway where one agent always stood. She met with Jennifer, Ray's daughter-in-law, twice weekly for therapy sessions that gradually helped her process trauma into something survivable. The Brotherhood maintained their presence, rotating through Frank's house in shifts that provided continuity beyond the professional agents. They taught Grace things the FBI couldn't: how to change motorcycle oil, how to throw a punch properly, how to read weather patterns, how to cook Betty's meatloaf recipe. They gave her normalcy wrapped in protection, family mixed with vigilance. Carlos's arm healed, the bullet wound becoming a scar he wore with quiet pride. He'd been wounded protecting a child, had stayed in the fight despite pain. It meant something to him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Grace noticed, asked about it one afternoon while he helped her with math homework. His answer was simple. Some scars are worth having. They remind us what we fought for. Dale Porter pleaded guilty to child endangerment and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. His testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided the FBI with critical information about the Westbrook organization's operations. He'd served 20 years, eligible for parole after 12 if he maintained cooperation. Frank felt no satisfaction in the sentence, only a grim acknowledgement that justice, such as it was, had been served. Nathan Reeves, the wounded attacker, faced attempted murder charges along with his trafficking-related counts. He refused to cooperate initially, but the evidence was overwhelming. His trial was scheduled for 6 months out, with Grace listed as a potential witness if needed. The other 4 attackers from that night remained at large. Their identities known, but their locations unknown. The FBI assured Frank they were being hunted, that arrests were imminent. Frank remained skeptical, his trust in bureaucratic promises limited by experience. 3 months after the rescue, on a cold November morning, Grace came to Frank with an envelope. Inside was a drawing she'd made. 6 motorcycles arranged in a protective circle around a small figure holding a sunflower. The detail was remarkable for a 10-year-old. Each bike distinct, each rider recognizable despite the simple lines. At the bottom, she'd written, "My guardians." Frank's throat tightened. "Grace, this is beautiful. I want you to have it, to remember." "Remember what?" "That you stopped, when you didn't have to, when it would have been easier to just keep riding." Frank pulled her into a hug. This child who'd somehow become his daughter in everything but paperwork. The adoption process was underway, the bureaucracy grinding through background checks and home studies and evaluations. Patricia Morrison, the CPS worker, had visited twice and both times left with positive reports. The FBI's presence actually helped. It demonstrated Frank's commitment to Grace's safety, his willingness to transform his life completely for her well-being. But adoption took time, and Grace's legal status remained in limbo. Technically, she was an emergency foster placement pending permanent resolution. The uncertainty gnawed at both of them. The fear that bureaucracy might decide Frank wasn't suitable, that she'd be moved to another home, that the connection they'd formed might be severed by people who'd never met them, making decisions from offices hundreds of miles away. Jennifer, the therapist, assured Frank that Grace was healing well given the circumstances. The nightmares had decreased from nightly to occasional. She was making friends at school, her grades improving from barely passing to honor roll. She'd stopped flinching when men raised their voices. She'd started planning for the future, wanting to learn to ride motorcycles properly, talking about becoming a counselor herself someday to help other kids who'd been hurt. The progress was real but fragile, built on the foundation of Frank's steady presence and the Brotherhood's unwavering support. Any disruption could undo months of healing. Frank made sure every social worker, every evaluator, every person with power over Grace's placement understood that. In early December, Agent Chen visited with news. The FBI had arrested 14 members of the Westbrook organization, including 2 of the 4 attackers from that November night. The organization's infrastructure was dismantled, their operations disrupted, their leaders facing federal charges that would put them away for decades. Chen's expression held cautious optimism. "Grace is safe. The threat level has dropped from critical to minimal. We're going to scale back our presence here. One agent during the day, none at night unless specific intelligence suggests otherwise." Frank absorbed this. "They're really gone? No more danger?" "I won't lie and say zero risk, but realistically, the organization has bigger problems than one escaped victim. They're fighting for survival and trying to avoid prison. Grace isn't a priority anymore." It felt anticlimactic, the slow fade of danger rather than a definitive ending. But Frank recognized the truth. Most threats ended not with dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet dissolution. Enemies moving on to other targets, other concerns. Grace's response when Frank told her was subdued. "So I'm really safe now?" "Yes, sweetheart, really safe." She processed this, then asked, "Does that mean I have to leave? Go to a regular foster home?" Frank's heart clenched. "No, unless you want to. The adoption paperwork is still processing. If approved, and Patricia seems to think it will be, you'll stay here permanently, if you want to." "I want to." No hesitation, no doubt. "I want to stay with you." The official adoption approval came in February, 5 months after that Sunday highway encounter. Patricia Morrison delivered the news in person, her professional detachment cracking into genuine warmth. "Congratulations, Frank. The courts approved your petition. Grace Ann Porter will legally become Grace Ann Brennan pending final hearing in March." Frank had faced enemy fire, had buried the woman he loved, had lived through decades of hardship and loss. But hearing those words broke him in ways combat never had. He excused himself, stepped onto his porch, and let tears fall that had been waiting 40 years to escape. Ray found him there, understood without asking, simply stood beside his brother and waited. When Frank could speak again, his voice was rough. "I'm 63 years old, Ray. I'll be 80 when she graduates high school. Might not live to see her married. Might not meet my grandchildren. Maybe, or maybe you've got 30 more years. Either way, you'll have given her something she lost. A father. That's worth any amount of time. The final adoption hearing in March was brief, procedural, anticlimactic in the way important things often were. The judge asked Grace if she understood what adoption meant, if she wanted Frank to be her legal father. Her answer was clear. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Frank saved my life. Now I want him to be part of it forever. The judge signed papers, declared it official, and just like that, Frank Brennan became a father at 63. The Brotherhood attended in full dress, leather vests left at home, replaced by button-down shirts and ties that looked uncomfortable but appropriate. Betty wept openly. Grace beamed. Frank felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. His life's trajectory altered in ways he was still processing. They celebrated at Betty's house with a meal that included all of Grace's favorites and none of Frank's. She'd earned that right. Around the table, the Brotherhood shared stories heavily edited for young ears about their adventures, their bana, their history. Grace listened with the fascination of someone discovering their new family's mythology. Carlos told her about the club's founding, 6 veterans trying to find purpose after war. Tom shared stories about teaching Sunday school, how helping kids had given him direction. Pete admitted his failures as a father to his own daughter, his hope that helping raise Grace was a kind of redemption. Joe talked about his son, the pain of loss, the joy of finding purpose again in protecting Grace. Ray stood, raising a glass of Betty's lemonade. To Grace Brennan, our guardian reminded us why we ride, not for freedom, not for rebellion, but to be ready. Ready for the moment when someone needs help. Ready to stop when others pass by. Ready to stand when it's easier to walk away. Every man raised their glass. Grace looked around the table, understanding that she was seeing something rare. Men who'd found meaning not in their own lives, but in protecting hers. Frank's toast was simpler. To family, the kind we're born into, and the kind we choose. Spring arrived late in Montana, snow lingering until April before finally surrendering to warming. Grace's 11th birthday fell on a Saturday, and Frank organized a party that brought together school friends, church community, and the Brotherhood. The house filled with laughter, the yard with games, the table with cake that Grace had picked out herself, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with motorcycles made from fondant. She blew out candles, made a wish she wouldn't share, cut the first slice with a confidence that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. Frank watched her navigate social situations, saw how therapy and stability had transformed fear into cautious optimism. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected loud noises, still carried scars that would take years to fully heal. But she was healing, and that was everything. That night, after guests had left and cleanup was finished, Grace asked Frank to take her somewhere. He expected the park or maybe the ice cream shop. Instead, she directed him to Highway 89, to the exact spot where she'd run from the trees and flagged down 6 bikers. They stood on the shoulder, spring grass beginning to green around the gravel. Grace was quiet, processing something internal. Finally, she spoke. This is where my life changed, where I stopped running and started living. Frank understood the need to mark the place, to acknowledge the transformation. You want to do something? Plant something? Grace reached into her pocket, pulled out a packet of wildflower seeds Betty had given her, and together they scattered them along the roadside, mixing them with soil, marking the spot where terror had become hope. As they worked, a motorcycle approached, solo rider, vintage bike. The rider slowed, seeing them on the shoulder, pulling over to check if they needed help. An old instinct, biker code, you stop for people on the roadside. The rider lifted her helmet, a woman in her 50s, leather vest marked with patches from charity rides and veteran organizations. Her eyes assessed the situation, saw no emergency, but sensed something else. Grace spoke before Frank could. We're okay, just planting flowers. This is where I was rescued. The woman's expression shifted, recognition dawning. You're the girl from last year, the trafficking case, I read about it. Yes, ma'am. These men, Grace indicated Frank. They saved me. The woman looked at Frank with the particular respect one veteran showed another. You're one of the Brotherhood. Heard about what you did. A lot of riders have. You're heroes in the community. Frank shook his head. We just stopped. Anyone would have. No, the woman's voice carried certainty. Most people would have called someone else. Let professionals handle it. You stopped. You fought. You gave a damn. That's rare. She remounted her bike, started the engine. Before pulling away, she raised her hand in the two-fingered salute bikers used. Rubber side down, safe travels. Frank returned it, watching her merge back into traffic. Another rider on another journey. Grace watched her go. She called you a hero. I'm not. I'm just a man who made a choice. The right choice. Frank couldn't argue with that. Summer brought long days and the kind of heat that made Montana bearable. Frank taught Grace to ride, starting small with a dirt bike in the pasture, teaching her balance and throttle control and the particular joy of two wheels in open space. The Brotherhood supervised, offering advice and catching her when she inevitably fell. She took to it naturally, fearless in ways that terrified Frank, but that he knew better than to suppress. This was healing too, reclaiming control, mastering something powerful, feeling the freedom that came with speed and skill. By August, she could handle the dirt bike competently enough that Frank began considering a street-legal bike for when she turned 14. Ray was already planning modifications. Tom was researching safety gear. Pete was sketching custom paint designs. The Brotherhood was all in on supporting Frank's daughter, the girl who'd brought purpose back to their sunset years. The anniversary of the rescue approached. 1 year since that Sunday ride had changed everything. Frank hadn't planned anything special, but the Brotherhood did. They organized a ride, full club turnout, destination Highway 89. 30 bikers showed up. Not just the original 6, but prospects and members and associates who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of marking it. They rode in formation, engines thundering, a rolling tribute to the moment that had defined them. At the spot where wildflowers now grew thick, they stopped. Grace walked to the flowers, touched the blooms, remembered the terror and the desperate hope. Then she turned to face 30 bikers, men and women who'd come to honor her survival and the men who'd enabled it. Her voice carried clear. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I ran through those trees thinking I'd be caught, thinking no one would help. Then I heard your motorcycles, and 6 men stopped when they could have kept riding. She looked at Frank, Ray, Tom, Pete, Carlos, Joe. You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. But you stopped. You fought. You gave me a future I thought was gone. The crowd was silent, 30 people understanding they were witnessing something sacred. Grace continued. People see bikers and sometimes they're scared. They see the leather and the noise and they think danger. But I know different. I know bikers are the people who stop, who help, who protect. You're heroes even though you don't think you are. Frank felt tears he didn't bother hiding. Around him, hard men were equally affected, the story reminding them why they rode, why community mattered, why giving a damn was worth the cost. Grace pulled something from her backpack, a leather vest, child-sized, custom-made. On the back was the last Brotherhood emblem, and underneath, words embroidered in silver thread. Honorary member, guardian angel. Ray stepped forward, helping her put it on. It fit perfectly, marking her as one of them, protected and family. Carlos spoke for everyone. Grace Brennan, you honor us. Wear that vest proudly. You're part of this Brotherhood now and forever. 30 engines started simultaneously, the roar echoing across the valley. They rode past the wildflower patch in single file, each biker raising a hand in salute. Grace stood with Frank, watching them pass us, wearing her vest with pride that was visible from the set of her shoulders. When the last bike had passed and silence returned, Grace looked up at Frank. Thank you for everything. Grace, I should be thanking you. For what? You saved me? Frank knelt, meeting her eyes. You saved me too. Gave me purpose when I thought I was just riding out my days waiting to die. Gave me a reason to get up in the morning beyond habit. Made me a father when I thought that chance had passed. You saved me, sweetheart. Every bit as much as I saved you. They stood together in the place where terror had become hope, where a Sunday ride had become destiny. The wildflowers swayed in the breeze, bright splashes of color marking sacred ground. Frank thought about the future. Grace's teenage years, college, marriage, children of his own to spoil. He might not live to see all of it, but he'd see enough. He'd be present for the healing, the growing, the becoming. That was enough, more than enough. Grace took his hand. Can we come back here sometimes, remember? Whenever you want. Good, because I never want to forget that people stopped, that you stopped. They walked to Frank's bike, Grace mounting behind him with practiced ease. The ride home was familiar now. This road they'd traveled countless times in the year since everything changed. But familiarity didn't diminish the weight of what had happened here, didn't make the miracle of that Sunday encounter any less profound. Frank thought about the chain of choices that had led to this moment. The decision to ride that day, the route they'd chosen, the timing that had put them on Highway 89 exactly when Grace needed them. Coincidence or destiny, luck or purpose, he'd never know for certain. But it felt like more than chance. Felt like some force had arranged the pieces specifically so six old bikers would be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The house came into view, no longer a bachelor's empty shell, but a home filled with life and laughter and futures being built. Grace's homework was scattered on the kitchen table. Her drawings covered the refrigerator. Her shoes cluttered the entryway. The markers of childhood that Frank had never expected to navigate at 64, but that he cherished beyond measure. They pulled into the drive as sunset painted the sky. Grace dismounted, handed Frank her helmet, headed inside calling that she was hungry. The mundane request made Frank smile, from terrified victim to secure child asking about dinner. That transformation was the victory, more important than any firefight or legal battle. Ray's truck was in the drive, the man himself on the porch with two beers. He handed one to Frank. Good ride? The best. Grace seems happy. She is, we both are. Ray nodded, understanding flowing in the silence. They'd been friends for 40 years, brothers in every way that mattered. They'd built lives, lost loves, survived wars and peace and everything between. But this, helping raise Grace, giving her the childhood she deserved, this felt like the culmination of everything, the point toward which their whole friendship had been moving. Ray finally spoke. You know what I think? I think we were always supposed to find her. All of it, the club, the rides, the decades of brotherhood. It was preparation for that moment, for her. Frank considered this, found truth in it. Maybe, or maybe life is just random and we made the choice to stop. Either way, she's here now. She's ours. That's what matters. Amen to that. They sat in comfortable silence. Two old men watching the sunset, drinking beer, thinking about the girl inside who'd transformed their twilight years into something bright and meaningful. The road ahead was uncertain. Frank's health wouldn't last forever, and raising a daughter came with challenges he was still discovering. But uncertainty was just another kind of freedom, another adventure, another ride into the unknown. Grace appeared in the doorway. Uncle Ray, you're staying for dinner, right? I'm making spaghetti. Ray grinned. Wouldn't miss it, kiddo. She disappeared inside, and the sound of her singing drifted through the screen door. Off-key, enthusiastic, the song some pop thing Frank didn't recognize, but that made Grace happy. That was enough. Frank stood, stretched his back, felt the various aches and pains of 64 years. None of it mattered. He had a daughter to raise, a family to nurture, a purpose that extended beyond himself. The last Brotherhood had ridden for 40 years, and now they had a legacy worth more than any patch or reputation. A child saved, a life redeemed, proof that stopping when others passed by could change everything. The sun touched the horizon and Frank went inside to help Grace make dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of watching his daughter grow. But tonight was simple. Family, food, and the quiet satisfaction of choices made right. Behind them, the wildflowers on Highway 89 would bloom and fade and bloom again, marking the spot where everything changed, where six old bikers stopped, where a terrified girl found hope, where heroism looked like ordinary men making extraordinary choices. The road went on, as it always did, but now Frank rode it with someone beside him, a daughter who taught him that purpose could come at any age. That family was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most important journey was the one you never planned to take. He was 64 years old, a father, a guardian, a man who'd stopped when it mattered most, and he wouldn't change a single mile of the road that had brought him here.